I'm Andy Schmuckler. I'm doing a series here about this profoundly teachable moment. And one thing that is important, part of that teaching is to understand that this catastrophe that we've come to uh, is not something that's imposed by one part of America on another. It is a function of the whole system as it has been evolving dynamically through time. We are a whole system, and the interaction among the elements is such that really what happens is a function of the whole set of forces that are at work. Extremely complex, but at least to say, in this case, that what was happening on the conservative, if we look at conservative America and liberal America, and what is the dynamic which brought us to this catastrophe? Well, part of that dynamic is what happened in conservative America from the time of Reagan and the first Bush, where there definitely a mixture of constructive and destructive, admirable and contemptible, and that's maybe the wrong word, but not admirable anyway, characteristics. It became a political party that was generating ruled by a very different spirit that was consistently working to make things worse. You can infer from the fact that they became increasingly like you couldn't find anything that they did that made anything better. You would infer that there must be something behind that that can account for the fact that every time you flip the coin, whatever the issue, climate change, inequalities, relationship between the races, the rule of law, every time you flip the coin, they come down on the destructive side. So it's not by chance when that happens. It's because there's something determining that this is you can refer to it as a force. You can say that there's a spirit of something or other, but there's something behind that consistency. And that was what was happening on the political right. Meanwhile, on the political left, in a healthy system, where you've got positive values that are held by the majority of the people, and you've got this political force that has no regard for them, it consistently is banging up against them or breaking them or bending them or damaging them in some way, the other part of the system would reach out to the public to withdraw their support, make them pay a political price, and they just never did. I mean, juncture after juncture, the Democrats failed to. That book back there, my 2015 book, it had a preface about the 2014 campaign. The Republicans' conduct in the first 2 years of Obama's second term was absolutely indefensible. It was the least productive Congress, and it was because the Republicans made it that way. Indefensible conduct, always trying to make the failure of the other side their priority rather than doing anything for the good of the nation. A case to be prosecuted, and the Democrats didn't. So you can trace this kind of thing throughout this era leading up to this catastrophe. So while the one side was becoming a force that's consistently making the human world worse, this other thing was not making them pay a price. They were rewarded for their across the board obstructionism of Obama. By the end of Obama comes into office, he's got everything going for him. I mean, he was the hero of the world. He was going to get the Nobel Prize because the world thinks he's a savior, and he throws all that away. Job one was clearly that the Republican Party had become something kind of dangerous to American values, American institutions. W had left the place a shambles. He had been elected to restore honesty and integrity and basic American values. after an administration that had torture memos and had probably for imperialistic purposes invaded another country under false pretenses, he had the ability to be the transformative president that he wanted to be, but he didn't become that. He ended up deprived of any ability to get anything through Congress because he never fought the fight against the enemies that were arrayed against him. And that's typical. I mean, that is representative of what liberal America has been. And just to demonstrate that that particular story is representative, by the way, I really like Obama, but he blew it. I'm sorry, he blew it. He did not do job one, which was to deal with the thing that the Republican Party had become, and to reward them only for cooperation and to punish them for what they ended up doing, making warfare against him all of what they intended to do with their power, when there are good things that could be done by a transformative president in that position if he maintained his power. But he lost it, and he ended up being able to just do executive actions. He was pushed back into the castle because he'd been driven out of the fields. And that's representative of an aspect of liberal America. And part of that, but not the part that I think is important, which I'll get to in the next video, just to keep things short. Part of that is a fear of fighting. I'm pretty sure I know that that's there. The Democrats have not really chosen a fighter. FDR is my favorite fighter as a Democratic American president. But John Kerry wasn't such a great fighter. I don't know that it would have helped if Kamala had been a great fighter and had gone after, like FDR would have. Malefactors of great wealth, I welcome their hatred. Well, I don't know that that would have been appropriate. Nonetheless, we were already profoundly broken as a nation, that even with things shown the way they were shown between Kamala and Trump, that so many Americans could choose Trump. That's the clock striking 13 that leads us to this teachable moment where we can recognize that the most important problem about the Democrats and the liberal world is not so much what just happened in the campaign, which was a damn good one as far as I'm concerned, but whatever the mistakes, you should have been able to defeat Trump with a dead man. If the real nature of the choice was understood by Americans who understood things and who cared about basic American values. One guy once said, I'd vote for Biden even if he were dead, in terms of his fitness as an old man. Yeah, anybody. But Trump, who's the distinction of being about as dangerous a president as, if the project was, how could you design somebody to be really dangerous and destructive as president of the United States? He would be maybe a first place finisher. The only major thing I think you would want to change is there may be more rational and impactful shrewder calculations about ways of doing things. But look, this guy has already shown he can survive and get away with things which I never would have believed he would. And I don't think anybody else much believed. I mean, can you believe this guy committed all these crimes right in front of everybody's eyes, and he's getting off scot-free? When people said he was running to stay out of jail, well, there's no way the American people are going to elect this guy. Well, but they did. And by the time, if you get to the point where the American people are that way, the problem isn't whether you talked about the Supreme Court enough in the campaign. The problem is right there in the American people. that something's happened to them. And how did it happen to them? Well, the Democratic Party wasn't, and liberal America were not going up against this thing to make it pay a price. Across the board obstructionism, indefensible policy. Why weren't they compelled to defend it, the indefensible, or change their ways? Obama blew it, by the way, right from the beginning with the health care. He gave more power to the people who are fighting him than to the people who are ready to cooperate with him. It's systemic. It's as though there's a polarized image. On the right, you get this thing which is really good at going after power and playing the power games and treating everything as a contest for who's going to call the shots here. But is morally bankrupt, is consistently making the world more broken, is dark, it's got all the various human defects that we talk about, it's filled with hate, it's cruel, it's willing to inflict injustice, it goes after vulnerable people, all that stuff. The good at power, but aligned with a coherent, but a force of brokenness. And on the other side, you've got the Democrats who are ending up kind of cleansed of their most of what was, maybe amiss with them, but defending American values against the other force that's attacking them. So they look pretty good on the moral dimension. But when it comes to the fight for power, Biden, who is astride the world in 2009, gives away all of his power. I'm not inventing this in retrospect. I wrote something that was in the Baltimore Sun. You can go to my website, A Better Human Story, or just go to Google and do my last name, Schmuckler, and baltsun.com. And there's a piece that was published in the very first year of Obama's 8-year presidency, saying you were elected to fight this fight, not to forfeit it, but he forfeited it. I mean, I got the thing into the Baltimore Sun, but I didn't have any impact. And then, the point I was getting to before, you can tell that this is a problem with liberal America, but generally, because when Obama became the former president, liberal America was just absolutely unqualifiedly celebrating him as such a wonderful president. Well, he is a wonderful guy, and he did try to do a lot of good things, and he tried to do a lot of other good things. But they don't seem to have noticed that he never fought the fight that needed to be fought. I think that Trump, that if Obama had fought the fight against that force that was rising on the right, that met and decided to make his failure their priority in his first term. If he had fought that fight from the place of strength that he began with and exposed them for what they were and had the American people compel them to cooperate, or they'd be rejected at the polls, all of which I think could have been done. I don't think we would have gotten to a President Trump. He didn't make them pay a price for their racism or that birther thing. He didn't make them pay a price for their obstructionism, which is essentially a grab for power at the expense of the American people. How can they get rewarded at the polls like in 2014 for behaving that way? Well, because the Democrats never even raised the issue in that campaign. And something similar was going on in 2010 election, where the Democrats also got wiped off the board. So power was going more and more to the force that was behaving worse and worse. It's like there's a polarization. Each is sort of the opposite of the other. I don't know if you've ever seen the kids' movie. Well, Dark Crystal. There are these two sets of there are the Skeksis that are all these kind of ugly things, and then there are these monks who are all these kind of beautiful things, and the Skeksis are ruling the country, but the plot is to change all that. And in the end, the two sets that have been opposite come together into a unity. And that's what happened in the American cultural system, was there is a polarization that took place. So this catastrophe, if liberal America had been as it should be, it would have waged war and won it when this ugly force was just beginning to rise. It would have killed it in the cradle. But because it didn't fight at all, it kept growing and growing and growing until we get to a Donald Trump. Obviously, the very wrong kind of person. I mean, you hardly could, even in 2015 and 2016, you could tell. The people out there on Mount Rushmore would say, this is exactly what you don't want in the presidency. Even then, it was visible. But then you get to 2024, and he's made manifest all these things, the extortion of Ukraine and the fomenting of the insurrection and the criminality and his contempt for subpoenas and his unwillingness to respect the rule of law or even the truth in any way. I mean, such a monstrosity of a human being. And not at all hidden, this monstrosity. And we get to the point where enough Americans, shown what they're shown, with the information available, what they see, or whether they're informed what they're informed, whatever is wrong with them is profoundly wrong. And the Democrats, as part of the system, cooperated in making the unthinkable possible. Conservative America embraced brokenness. They mistook what was really evil for the good. Evil defined as a coherent force of brokenness. And the Democrats, where the Republicans mistook the evil for the good, the Democrats didn't notice that a coherent force, which is my definition of evil, they didn't notice that an evil force was confronting them in the struggle for power and didn't fight against it accordingly. And by the way, those are the terms, whether their words are used or not. That is how the fight must be fought. It is a battle between two forces, one of which behaves as traditionally we've understood evil to behave, one of which is the opposite, good. And these are not meaningless words. I'll get to that. The society somehow failed in a process of integration, the wholeness in which the realm of power and the realm of good versus evil, of morality, are in alignment, that they are combined. That is the goal of civilization. That's been what's been so hard, is to combine power with goodness. That's why medieval literature is full of these, the good king. Whenever it has happened that if power and goodness get brought together, it has been something to celebrate. And in the American democracy, it was one of the places where power and goodness had more alignment than in previous systems of absolute monarchs and of Middle Eastern tyrants, et cetera, bringing those two things together into a kind of wholeness. But America broke apart. I have some thoughts, but I think the question, well, how did that happen, is a very important one. Because if we're going to heal America, we got to find out something about what the weaknesses were. And one of the things that I think is related to it is one side is hot to fight and the other side is afraid of fighting. But the other thing is one side mistakes the good for the evil, and the other side lacks a way of understanding how actually the world is a place where there is a drama that goes on at the heart of things, which can reasonably be dubbed a battle between good and evil. You don't have to use those words, but in fact, you can see that. And that's one of the things in this profoundly teachable moment that I'm going to try to show, that you actually can see that this battle here in America was such a battle. This time, which politics when I was growing up in America wasn't like that. But also that the human drama in general cannot be understood without recognizing that there are forces at work that are important in determining the destiny of how civilization evolves, how societies develop. There is a dynamic that goes on that has to do with there being actually two coherent forces that can be shown that are embattled. And one of those forces is consistently working to make things worse. And one of them is consistently working to make things better, which is a good definition of a battle between good and evil, isn't it? When one side forfeits that battle, when the side whose job it is to defend the good essentially doesn't fight it because it doesn't see it. And here's the other thing. It doesn't see it because its way of understanding things doesn't make room for it. And so I'm going to come back and talk about essentially the religious point of view, where the idea of a battle between good and evil is very central and vivid and supernatural. And then you get to what I can think is the predominant, you could say that the secular worldview is predominating in liberal America. I think that's fair to say. And that secular worldview doesn't have the Satan and evil in the way that the religious, and it doesn't have any other way of recognizing if there is, as I'm maintaining, there is a battle between two coherent forces that you might reasonably call that way, that's going to be essential to have a way of understanding how that can be. It's not God and Satan in the book of Genesis. And what I intend to offer is I can show, as the social scientist or social theorist that I was trained to be, that there is nothing supernatural, that there are systemic dynamics that are inevitable for a species like us. In the biologically evolved order, I think I can show. You don't need to talk about things like this. But once you get a species like us that takes an unprecedented step of extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically, it enters into a kind of disorder that has a systemic dynamic. That there are coherent forces that inevitably become central to the process of the world, of a civilization creating species. And I'll get to all that. But for the moment, let's just say liberal America should recognize its failure to see what was going on as a coherent force of destruction was taking over a once respectable political party, and should recognize that the reason they failed in that way was that the secular worldview didn't have a way of conceptualizing it. My purpose in future parts of these videos, will be to show that there is a rational, naturalistic, I'm not sure what all the words should be, empirically comprehensible, logical, social scientific way of understanding why it is that we would, as a species, be contending with something like what took over the Republican Party and what now is going to give us a catastrophic presidency. I hope it's not as bad as it looks like it could be. And it wouldn't have happened if liberal America had understood from the beginning what was going on with the rise of Gingrich and Limbaugh and all the rest of them and had fought it appropriately. So it matters whether you understand the forces at work. The failure to understand the forces at work, to recognize them, they brought us to this catastrophe just as much as the stuff that's been happening on the right that's so ugly. Okay, if you want to see me lay out these things in various coherent ways, my craft has been writing. I'm not planning these things very well. I hope that's okay. And on my website, abetterhumanstory.org, you can find these ideas integrated with a whole bunch else that I've been working on for more than half a century.